I can't believe it, I forgot to bring my PICO scope. Disaster. So we're gonna go old school. So channel 1 is gonna be on the ignition coil, cylinder number 3. Channel 2, injector number 3. And channel 3 is an amp clamp around fuse injector A, which feeds the whole left bank coils and injectors. Let's fire up the Varus, go back in time, see if we can still use this, if I remember how to use the scope. Alright, here we go. Lab scope. 4-channel lab scope. Oh man, this brings back some memories. Let's turn on all 3 channels. And this one we want, let's see, 2 volts per division, 5 volts per division, 0 to 20. Same for the green, 5 volts per division. And the green, we want, let's say, 2 volts. Oh, this is ignition scope. We want just regular test leads, volts DC. 5 volts per division. Let's do 1 volt per division. 1 volt is 10 amps. We can even knock that down a bit. So it's going to be 10 amps. Okay. So this is our current right here. Well, let's just fire it up, see. Yep, so that was positive. Let me re-zero that. And we'll need to increase our time base. Well, 200 milliseconds is pretty good. Let's do 500. Get a little more data. So my channel 1, I expect to see 12 volts on there. Let me double check that connection and re-zero the amp clamp. Alright, we're back. 12 volts. Pause that. Zoom out. That was a long crank and then it fired up. I'm not seeing anything on the control wire for the ignition coil. I need my PICO scope. So, let's see here. That's the injector. That's right here. 1, 2, 3. Where's the ignition pulse? I'm not seeing the ignition pulse. Let me double check number 1, see if that's connected. So this is what happens when you don't have your favorite equipment. Things don't go well because the leads are a little short and they're pulling out of the connectors. So there we go. Okay, pause that. Now let's zoom in. So first was no start, then it fired right up. So you can see right there is an ignition trigger. So at each ignition trigger there should be a nice, it looks like a 5 amp current ramp. That's fine. The injectors were being pulsed. We can measure the pulse width of the injector. For example, right here. Use our cursors. and we want to see 7 milliseconds. Okay, that's fine. Should fire up. You see how painful this is compared to a PICO scope, right? And then it actually fired up right here. Ran fine, ran smooth. Where are the injector waveforms compared to the ignition? I want to see if the synchronization is also correct. So here, let's take this ignition pulse. So that's that hump. So it's kind of a pair, and then a space 1, longer space 1, pair. Just based on the firing order, we're looking at one bank. So the first one in this little pair is ignition, and the injector occurs over the third one. Okay? Now, let's go back here. Ignition is the first hump, injector occurs over the third hump. I don't see any issues. Why did this truck not want to start? Again, we can measure the pulse width right here. About 4 milliseconds. That's where the ignition's occurring. Let me save this and kind of do a little more, engage the brain muscles here. Oh, this whole time I had the cam sensor unplugged. Dang it! Alright, cam sensor's plugged back in. Let's clear the fault code out. ETC is cleared. Read fault code. We should do a cam crank correlation on this thing. No fault code, yes. Okay. Same exact thing. Let's wait. Is it worse with the cam sensor plugged in? Oh gosh. Okay, let's try to do this crank relearn. Okay. Black wheels, set parking brake. Do not apply brake pedal, cycle ignition from off to on. It's better to do this with the Varus, which we actually have right here. Apply and hold brake pedal, start idle engine, yes. Okay. Learn this ignition. Okay. Let's see if that made any difference. This is insane. I mean, this is a really neat case study. Even though we're dealing with junk aftermarket parts, we still want to be accurate and pinpoint the root cause. Yes, the oxygen sensors are not correct to this vehicle, so they're not going to report. It's not going to go in a closed loop. But the starting problem, I don't think that's related to that. Right? I don't. We need some more data. We need a good scope. We need the PICO scope. We need cam crank, and then ignition injector, and see what happens when it starts and when it doesn't start. I think that's the only way to 100% do this. So I'm gonna go home, get my PICO, come back, wait until it stops raining, and then we'll redo this experiment. I really want to get to the bottom of this before anything else is touched. Alright, so I'm back in my garage, and this is our 1999 Chevy Silverado 1500 plow truck with the 4.8. The wiring is basically identical to the 5.3 that we're trying to diagnose. So first thing I want to do is check that oxygen sensor. Unplugged it, and the ground wire in the signal circuit, sure enough, it's 5 volts. So that's known good. Now let's see if the sensor itself is grounded on that wire to the case. Alright, here we go. So we're at the oxygen sensor. This is our wire that's supposed to be grounded through the sensor itself. So here's the pigtail. I'm going to take a test light from battery power, and on this pin it should be grounded through the sensor to the exhaust pipe. Let's see. Yes. You see the test light? Absolutely. That's a known good, so that 100% confirms that oxygen sensors are bad. However, the main customer complaint is this long crank time. So let's hook up the PICO scope to injector, ignition, cam, and crank, and get a known good capture. Alright, here we go. 4 channels on the real oscilloscope, 4-channel PICO. So what are the 4 channels? We have crankshaft position sensor, channel 1, camshaft position sensor, channel 2, ignition coil control, channel 3, that's on the number 3 coil, and finally injector number 3 control, that's channel 4. Let's fire it up and get a known good capture. Alright, here we go. Key on. That's our known good. Alright, excellent. So we have this waveform saved. You can see here in startup, the injector is fired twice, and then it syncs and fires exactly on this falling edge of the cam sensor. That's just the way it's set up on injector number 3, and the ignition is right here. So we have all 4 channels synchronized. We know exactly what to look for. Now, let me move one of the channels to that fuse, injector amp A fuse, and that way we can also see the current on this bank and get an extra synchronization. Alright, so now channel 4 instead of the injector, got that unplugged, and we'll put an amp clamp on here on that injector A fuse so we can see the current going to all the bank 1 injectors and ignition coils. See if I got it on the wrong way or the right way. You can even bump down the scale there. Okay, let's take a peek. Alright, so there's the current trace, the yellow. You can see when the ignition coil is triggered, we go up to about 6 amps. So this cursor right here, 5.5, about 6 amps. So that was the same as the other truck. And then when an injector fires, which is right here, we don't have it because we don't have an extra channel, that's about 1 amp. That's known good. Okay, let's I think that's all the data we need off this truck. Let's go to the broken truck. Back to the GMC 1500. We brought the big guns. So identical setup: channel 1 crank sensor, channel 2 cam sensor, channel 3 ignition control, the trigger, channel 4 injector number 3 control. Let's see how it compares to the known good. Alright, so here's a saved waveform from last time. So the ignition trigger occurs on the high, during the high section of the cam pulse. The injector is right on the falling edge. Let's roll the scope, see what happens. Okay, fired right up. Now let's shut her down. Amazing. That's it, we're done. See you guys, I told you the PICO scope would nail this in 2 seconds. Look at that cam pulse. It's garbage. So whatever AC Delco cam sensor was installed doesn't work. Well, doesn't work most of the time. Sometimes it comes back to life. Crazy. So we're done with this GMC. Without a scope, you would have 0 chance of figuring this out. 0. How would you measure a cam signal? You can't without an oscilloscope. And to have a good oscilloscope that's easy and fast to use, if you're doing this in the field as a professional, you have to have that. Remember, I went back to the Varus. Oh my god, I should have measured the cam signal with the Varus, but we have the known good, now we have the known bad, and we're done. So I'll tell the shop it needs OEM cam sensor, repair the pigtail correctly, 4 new oxygen sensors, and I don't recommend keeping the Chinesium ignition coils on there. Classic Chevy truck parts cannon strikes again, and that's it. Thanks all for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. A little bonus footage. Let's take a close look at the data. So when this truck fired up correctly, look, the ignition pulse was on the lower part of the cam signal. Not like our known good truck. When it didn't fire up, the ignition pulse was on the high side of the cam signal. So it's occurring on the exhaust stroke instead of the intake stroke. So this aftermarket junk cam sensor is flipping the signal around all the time. And if you read description and operation, these trucks, they need a cam signal to start, but if it doesn't start on the first try, it'll actually try the ignition on the other phase, or the other 180 degrees of the cam. That's a strategy. So I said it might be a long crank time, but it should switch. Let's see if that happens. So I have this waveform saved. Okay, fired up. Runs fine. And now let's see if it starts again. So it's not switching. Nope, still didn't switch. So when it's trying the known good, what's programmed into the computer, it doesn't start. When it tries the reverse, 180, out of sync, it starts right up and runs. So that's computer strategy. Something's wrong with this cam sensor. That was my gut feeling all along. It's been messed with. I'm wondering if perhaps the feed and the ground are reversed on it. Because we took a picture on the Known Good truck. Let's double check the wiring, because the pigtail has 3 white wires. They could be swapped around. Alright, so I got the cam sensor pigtail out, and I want to match up the wiring colors here. So here's the OEM connector pin layout. A is brown and white, that's the signal. B is pink and black. C is red, if you're looking at it at the connector straight on like this. So this, we know the signal is correct because it's making its way to the PCM. So the signal is pin A, which is this wire right here, and that is, it's going to be hard to see, it is the brown and white, yes. So what about the power and the ground? The middle one looks like it goes to a pink and black, and that's correct. So the other one, the last one, C, has to be red, and it is red. So if this sensor, AC Delco, was bought on eBay and it flips the signal around, it's junk. What we could try, since we already have these nice U-Haul splice job, just switch the power and ground and see if it flips the signal. I don't know if that's appropriate, but it might work. Let's give it a shot. Alright, so I got the power and ground reversed. Cross your fingers, see if it works. Alright, let's roll the scope. Oh, let me plug in the cam sensor. It's funny, it fired right up though. It guessed correctly. Alright, moment of truth. Camshaft sensor is plugged in. No signal. I guessed right that time, but we have no signal if we switch to power and ground. So that's it. The wiring was correct. The camshaft position sensor is absolute counterfeit junk. Alright, so for now we're going to leave the cam sensor unplugged because it's actually more reliable starting with the cam sensor unplugged. Like that. 50-50. Moral of the story, you know what the moral of the story is. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.